Hey everybody, John Wagdon here with DevCentral, and we are coming to you with another Lightboard lesson video today. And today we're going to talk about SAML, what it is, why it's important, why you should care. So SAML stands for the Security Assertion Markup Language, and it's and kind of the basis for SAML is that you have a user or group of users that need access to all different kinds of applications, and how do you manage the access control for all that? You know, you're going to have a username and password for all these different things, and it gets out of control. So before we talk about SAML real quick, let me go over the quick way of how this used to be done, pre-SAML. So you would have, say, a client that needs to access, different applications, app 1, app 2, app 3, whatever. And so used to, back in the day, this application or this service that your client would need to access would have its own, say, database of username and password. And then the same would be true, for app 2 and then app 3. And so this guy's going to have a username here, username here, username here, different password. Well, guess what happens when that kind of stuff starts to go on? You got 15 different places you need to check, or 15 different applications you need to access to do your job. You're gonna, you're gonna grab a sticky and write down all these different usernames and passwords underneath your key, and you're gonna stick it underneath your keyboard, or maybe you're gonna stick it on top of your keyboard, whatever. But nonetheless, this gets like really difficult in terms of managing all these different databases back here. It also gets tough on your client to say, hey, you've got to have a different password and username and all that for every single thing. We've all been there. All right, so introduce SAML to this whole equation. So SAML comes into play where we say, let's, instead of having each application manage its own username, password database, that kind of thing, then let's bring all that into one place, have the client access that one place, and authenticate himself in that one place, and then that thing can go out to all these different places and say, hey, I've checked this guy, he's good to go, let him have access. All right, so in SAML you have three different main components. You have the user, who is your client, who is your employee or whatever, and then you have what's called the identity provider, and then you have the service provider. And so the service provider is basically all these different applications that you need to access. So I'm going to draw a quick SAML diagram where now you have a client who needs to access all these different applications. And let's say, I'll just use some examples. Let's say you've got Office 365. Let's say you have WebEx. Let's say you have Concur. Let's say you have Salesforce. I could go on and on and on. You got all these different things. So again, instead of having a username and password for every single one of these, you now bring, and so the service provider would be, the application that hosts these things. And so that's the service provider. So that's where you want to ultimately get. The identity provider is going to sit right here in the middle, IDP, and so what happens with SAML is the client, let's say you're going to go out to Office 365, for example. The client's going to say, hey, Office 365, I want to access your services right now. Office 365 is going to check and say, hey, are you authenticated to me for me to let you have access? And if you are, then you're good to go. If you're not, he's going to say, no, I'm going to send you down here to the identity provider, and the identity provider is going to authenticate you. Let's say, for example, against maybe I'll put AD for Active Directory, your local Active Directory. Identity provider would, let's say, authenticate you against your Active Directory credentials. And this, by the way, could be username and password. It could be two-factor authentication. It could be any number of different authentication means or mechanisms. But nonetheless, the authentication happens here. And then your identity provider, once the identity provider has authenticated you as a good user to this application, then your identity provider creates what's called an assertion. Assertion, if I can write that correctly. And this assertion has, it's XML based, and it's got, you can put all kinds of different information in here, but it may have like your username, it may have, you know, what office do you work in, are you in marketing, are you in sales, or whatever, so then that gives you different access to the different applications. But nonetheless, it creates this assertion, and the identity provider passes the SAML assertion back to the service provider saying, hey, this user is good to go. And then, and then that way everything's kind of stored right here at the identity provider level. And then now, let's say after you've written up your little Office 365 document, now you want to go out to WebEx, you want to have some, you know, some video call with all your coworkers, or maybe you need to go to Concur and book that flight for your next business trip or whatever. So now when you go there, then the identity provider already has your SAML assertion, and it can pass that on to the different services on this back end, and so you don't have to re-authenticate to each one of them. So it makes the client a lot happier because now you've only authenticated to one place, and you don't have to keep doing that over and over and over. It makes these guys happy because they only have one person to talk to in this identity provider, and they don't have to host their own, you know, username and password databases anymore. They let the identity provider take care of that. So SAMLs are really cool. It's kind of a way to really centralize and consolidate a lot of this headache, and so it really streamlines a lot of this, you know, access control stuff. And so anyway, so that's kind of SAML in a you know, in a nutshell right there. The way that it all works with the BigIP is you've got a client that comes in, and I'll draw a BigIP right here. And the BigIP, you can load on a module, APM, and APM is the thing that's going to take care of all this for you from a BigIP perspective. And then on the back side, you've got all your different services, you know, so service, you know, service 1, service 2, 3, all that stuff. And so, so anyway, so you can come into the BigIP, the APM can act as the identity provider, so the IDP, and for those services or those applications that you host internally, it can also act as the service provider for those as well. And so when a client comes in to access these things, and you can say, hey, the BigIP is the service provider back here, and then if the service is like, hey, I need some authentication, the BigIP simply passes from its service provider, you know, configuration back over to the identity provider configuration, still on the same box though, which is kind of cool. It creates a lot of efficiencies there as well. It authenticates you via the IDP portion of the BigIP, and then it lets you have access. Let's say you have some kind of, let's say you have some cloud-based services out here, you know, that you don't own, you know, and so that has its own service provider element with those services or with those applications. Your BigIP can still be the identity provider for your clients, but you would then connect, you know, out to the cloud via the BigIP as the service provider element to that. The service provider would then say, hey, I need to talk to the identity provider before I give this client access. Service provider would come back to your BigIP as the identity provider, and then it would give you access. So the BigIP can do a lot of things via this the Access Policy Manager, the APM, and so it can act as the IDP and the SP. But again, the reason that SAML is really cool is you don't have to have all these usernames and passwords and all this. So from a security perspective, it really consolidates. You tell your users, hey, one username, one password, maybe two-factor authentication, whatever you want to use to authenticate, it can handle all that stuff. As long as your applications or your services are SAML enabled, then you know, then you can do all this stuff. And again, you can set all of this stuff up on the BigIP via the Access Policy Manager, via the APM. So anyway, so get out there, configure APM with SAML. It's super easy to do. We'll attach some different resources to this video to show you how to go through all the different checkboxes and all the configuration steps. But this is a really powerful thing to do. It'll save you on security steps. It'll save you on management headache with having to reset a bunch of passwords and tell your clients to memorize 15 different passwords. And so anyway, so SAML is a really powerful thing. Hope you've learned a couple of things about the basics of SAML and what you can do with the APM. So get out there, test it out. implement it in your own environment. I think you'll all be happy that you did. So thanks for tuning in today to this Lightboard lesson, and we will see you guys out there in the community.